Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we recap the week that was as the Mets get cold following their winning streak. Of course, we discuss Francisco Alvarez as he blossoms into a potential star. Looking back and ahead at our scoreboard predictions and bring back the rotation review. Also, would this really be an episode of the Mets Pod without a lineup debate and a mailbag? So subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's a reminder, so you never miss a show. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And following a week where we celebrated the Mets finally getting hot, Joe, they are back to some uneven play as they lose a series in Chicago, and then they lose a series to the Rockies at Coors Field, dropping 2 out of 3 games in both. So the week that was, Joe, a little bit of a letdown after maybe the best week of Mets baseball all season.
I think it unfortunately shows like the Mets are currently a 500 team as we record here on Tuesday, and they're playing like a 500 team. You know, last week we were celebrating beating a couple good teams, lose 2 out of 3 for 2 series over this past week. And that's what 500 teams do, man. They're not able to be consistent. When the pitching's on, it seems like they're not hitting. And when they're hitting, it seems like the pitching's not on. So, I mean, that's just all the recipes of what an average team looks like.
No doubt about it. That's right. That's what you have to scale back and kind of remind yourself right now. The Mets are not a good team. The Mets are not a bad team. They are just treading water, which, listen, a lot of teams that get hot in October, not to glass half full this thing, because there's also a lot of teams that completely fall out of it after the deadline. This is how their seasons begin. They're trying to figure things out. They're trying to get right in certain areas, and they're trying to get healthy. And if you look across baseball, because I think we live in this Mets vacuum, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners do, there's a lot of teams with massive expectations like the Mets going through this right now, maybe even to a higher degree. Look at what's going on with the Padres, the St. Louis Cardinals. Those are teams that made big-time moves. The Phillies, who the Mets are going to see for 3 this week, have not gotten off to the start that they had hoped for as well. So the National League is wide open right now. And once again, you see the inconsistencies of this Mets team. Really, for me, Joe, with the week that was, what we just saw, and I think there's no other way around it, it's the pitching from top to bottom, right? Even when you get that really promising Max Scherzer start, and then you get a Justin Verlander letdown or anything along the lines of that, the bullpen being in a state of having to go to guys that you wouldn't really expect to have big innings this time of year. They're constantly out there, whether it's a Leone or whether it's a Brigham. I mean, there's countless. Nagosic obviously has pitched a lot, considering we haven't even reached June yet at that point. The pitching has been a massive problem. And we talk about this every single week, the ability to not go deep into games, but also really the trickle effect of having to go to relievers that are not high-impact relievers. And yes, Edwin Diaz getting hurt has a little bit of an effect on that. But even if Diaz was on this team, it's hard to believe that all their bullpen problems would be fixed as well with how little the rotation has given them. And I think that's extremely frustrating when you look at an offense that has actually found some life, especially since the youngsters have been playing.
It's definitely frustrating to see how the bullpen is. And I know during the spring, we were kind of, I don't know, buying what they were selling maybe, but talk about the options on the relievers and things like that. And, you know, I think it's something that we can look at right now on May 30th, and this could change over the next couple months. And I'm sure it will, as the Mets probably go out buying some relief help at some point. They didn't do enough to fix the bullpen. And regardless of Edwin Diaz's injury, sure, it would definitely be better. You know, you shift Dave Robertson down and Ottavino down, etc. But when you're relying on, you know, and Jeff Brigham's been good pretty
That's
much
the crazy
all
thing.
year. So like
Out of nowhere.
I don't think we could get after Jeff Brigham too hard, but you wouldn't be seeing so much Dominic Leone and Tommy Hunter and Steven Nagosic if the Mets pursued more of those relievers. So while we were kind of justifying in a way, don't go after Andrew Chafin or don't go after Zach Britton, who I think is still out there. But when we did that, it was maintain flexibility. Reality is they probably just needed more.
That's what it feels like. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. Let's actually talk about some good because amongst the issues that the Mets have, one that they don't have is that it looks like Francisco Alvarez might already be blossoming into a star. And maybe some of it is this kid just always seems to answer the bell in the big moment, loves the big moment, loves the big blast in the big moment. Obviously, the home runs are what we had hoped for with Alvarez. I think his defense has been better than what we expected as well. This guy is clutch. And finally, Joe, getting rewarded a little bit for it. We have been begging for him to get out of the 9th spot. Didn't expect him to go all the way up to 2, and maybe that's because the Mets had a couple guys sitting that day. But I think when you look at Alvarez, he is not only one of the best power hitters on this team, arguably the Mets' biggest power threat behind Pete Alonso, but now a guy that has the clutch factor that can get them back into any game. And let's not forget, Joe, he is doing this at age 21. That is absolutely absurd for a catcher in the major league. So if you're looking for promise right now and hope and maybe a trajectory that goes the other way for the Mets as the season wears on, it's that Francisco Alvarez is everything as advertised.
He looks every bit of what a superstar player in today's game looks like. He's got the swagger, he's got the confidence, and how he pimps his home runs and the little tattoos. Like I saw a picture SNY posted last night. I didn't even notice he has the best tattooed right on his throat. And it's just he's a unique player who has grown on both sides of the ball. When he first came up earlier this season, it felt like the big moments were finding him every time, and he was not up for it. He was over swinging, chasing everything, wanting to do everything. You're seeing his approach get better. His swing decisions have been great. And he's still going to strike out. That's part of the game, but he's not striking out nearly as much. He's drawing walks, so he's waiting for the pitch. And now and I've said this, we talked about this with Ronny Mauricio. We've talked about it with Vientos and Beatty and Alvarez. When you start making good swing decisions, you're going to get pitches to hit. And Alvarez is now getting pitches to hit, and he's executing in the big spot, big home runs. And man, it's just so rewarding to see a kid that was ranked as the top prospect in baseball, weirdly called up at the real end of last season for just like hope of a kind of spark. Didn't really get that opportunity, didn't do much, struggled out of the gate early this year with the big league team. And, I saw everyone's tweets. He's not ready. He's not ready. He needs to go back. And boy, I mean, right now, it's hard to say Francisco Alvarez isn't one of the top 3 to 4 hitters in this lineup. Maybe even higher. Maybe I'm being a little modest, but man, he looks every bit of what a superstar is. And that's great for the Mets going forward.
I think it makes you wonder even more why the Mets were so hesitant on not having him or Brett Beatty up here early in the season. I mean, Alvarez was only brought up on emergency when Narvaez obviously got hurt. They lost a couple catchers because the reality is you'd rather them get that comfort and adjustment period out of the way so that when big time baseball is going down and the stretch run happens, that these guys are acclimated and comfortable. And I think it's happened even quicker for Alvarez. And Joe, you brought up, obviously just swinging at better pitches and making smarter decisions. You look at Alvarez right now in his last 8 games, going back to May 17th, as we're almost in June. Throughout that period, he has 3 strikeouts and 5 home runs. That to me is just jarring for a young player that looked like he wanted to come up and swing at literally everything. That's been the story of his turnaround. And Joe, it goes back to something that you and I talked about and always talk about, something the Mets needed to find. They need to supplement a lineup that really didn't undergo much turnover, especially after the Correa deal fell through, which, by the way, folks, is looking like a good thing if you follow Carlos Correa's problems this year. We talked about where does this team find the extra home runs, right? You can count on Pete for way too many. You can count on Lindor. And then listen, Vogelbach in that department has been a massive disappointment, but we constantly, Joe, looked at the catching situation and said, okay, they didn't even get to double digits with all of their catchers last year. Alvarez is a guy that projects to hit 20 plus early in his career. And folks, you're seeing the type of power that's a low bar for him, but he was 21, so you set the bar low. I mean, that extra let's call it maybe 15 home runs this year from a position that traditionally across baseball does not give teams a lot of power. That is the Mets' biggest variable, the biggest chess piece that they might have for the long-term future.
It's a huge difference. And it's kind of like having an elite tight end in football, right? Like there's so few of them truly in the sport. So when you have one of them, you have you have a distinct advantage over your opponent. And at this point, I think if I saw actually on Twitter, I believe our friend Jolly Olive was talking about it. How many catchers right now would you take over Francisco Alvarez in the sport? Like, I'm not saying it's none, but I think the list is not very long. And he's
Murphy on the Braves and Adley on the Orioles are the two guys that come to mind for me. I mean, not many more.
Right. So it's, maybe Salvador Perez is up there, but he's a little older. But
if you're franchise building.
21 years old. I don't think people grasp how unheard of that is for a catcher to be at this level and performing. Think about Kevin Parada, the Mets' first-round pick last year. He's already older than Francisco Alvarez, and he's doing just kind of okay in high A Brooklyn, whereas Alvarez is on the major league team hitting second, and maybe we'll get into lineup here in a bit, but he'll be maybe a stalwart in the middle of the lineup as a 21-year-old at the big league level. Just absolutely great to see.
It really is, and it's huge. So, okay, so before we close the book on Alvarez, I mean, Joe, they're going to have a decision to make here. And I don't think there's a decision to make, right? When it comes down to it, Francisco Alvarez is one of the best offensive players on the team. Omar Narvaez can be a very, very serviceable player. I mean, we saw in a very short spurt the kind of hitter he can be. You don't want Alvarez catching every day. No team does that, and the Mets won't be doing that. I look at it like this, Joe, and they've been so hesitant, besides Vientos, because he's really a man out of position. They've been so hesitant to have Alvarez or Beatty DH consistently at all when they don't play. The Mets, if Narvaez comes back and he's a 270 hitter, a solid hitter for the Mets, and he catches, 40% of the games, whatever it may be, and you move Alvarez to a DH spot, the Mets lineup is significantly improved with that. But I think the ultimate point here, Joe, as much as it's something that they probably don't want to do, considering how much Buck likes the player, I think it's the end of the Tomas Nido era for the New York Mets.
I wonder if it is, to be honest with you.
Or do you think they can carry three?
Billy Epler had said in spring training that he could envision scenarios where they're carrying three catchers, because I do believe, and it may not be a right now thing, but we're talking about how bad the catching is in the sport.
It's awful.
If you're able to hang on to three catchers for a few weeks, could you potentially, and I'm not saying you're getting a big piece, but if you could hang on for a little bit until teams are kind of ready to trade, could you flip a Tomas Nido to help your bullpen, or Tomas Nido and something to help your bullpen a month from now? At that point, you'd have to make that would be at the expense of, maybe one of these low end relievers and carry a deeper bench. Or is it the end of the road for Daniel Vogelbach? Is it the end of the road for Tommy Pham? I'm not saying that it won't be Tomas Nido. I think that's kind of like the easy catcher for catcher swap. But I think we should at least keep in the back of our minds the possibility that they do carry three catchers for a period of time before eventually making a decision. And then you also have the ability to give Alvarez a day off without giving him a day off by putting him at that DH spot, putting Narvaez behind the plate, and then you still have a backup catcher. Because that was, frankly, one of the reasons Buck talked about not wanting to DH Alvarez, is they wouldn't have a backup catcher at that point. Because if you took him out, I think you lose the DH or whatever. So, yeah.
I don't think that's crazy at all, for the fact, like you said, just hold on a little bit and try to use him. You nailed it. You're not getting a setup man or anything crazy like that, but an arm, a useful arm that can give you innings. Or is he a supplement to a trade that you ultimately have to make? Because Nido, for a team that needs a backup catcher, he's under team control next year. So it's not like a team's you're not renting a Tomas Nido as your backup catcher for the stretch. A team that is, maybe retooling, not rebuilding, but retooling in a sense, would take on a player like Nido because he's extremely cost effective. He is good defensively. His bat was not good this year, which was a massive disappointment. No denying that. But like you said, Joe, we constantly live in this Mets vacuum. And when you see Gary Sanchez picked up by the Padres right away,
just shows.
It goes to show you where, I mean, catching is in the basement right now in baseball. And it's a position that your starting catcher needs a lot of time off. So backups are very, very prevalent. They matter a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Mets try to pull that off either. I wouldn't be surprised at all. All right, let's review our scoreboard predictions. We could have a laugh. I know I could have a laugh myself from last week. And then we'll do some for the next week when they take on, of course, the Phillies throughout this three-game stretch right away. But we'll do the 6 games like we always do. So last week, not a good week for the Mets. Not a bad week for you, Joe. The first one, over-under push was set at 4 for how many Mets wins in the next 6 games. Joe, we both said push. The Mets won 2 out of the 6. No points awarded. Thank you, Mets, for nothing. Over-under push was set at 3 for how many quality starts in the next 6 games. Joe, you went over like a madman. I said push, which I thought was setting the bar pretty low. The Mets had 2 quality starts in 6 games. No points awarded. But this is where you started to make your push, Joe. Over-under push was set at 3 for how many games Mark Vientos starts in the next 6. You went with a push at 3. I went with under. And boy, did you need to catch up because Vientos wasn't playing at all until the weekend. He did start 3. Joe, you are awarded a point. Our last one was set at 10 for Mets home runs in the next 6 games. I was feeling bold and went over. Joe, you went under. They had 8. So you get the point, Joe. Pretty good, though, home run total for the Mets of 8, considering 2 weeks ago we were talking about how they couldn't hit any in a 4 to 5 game stretch. So Joe walks away with 2 points from last week. I get 0. Joe leads the season 9-7, and that goes into this week. We got Philly for 3 games and then the Blue Jays for 3. And we will start, as we always do, with Mets wins set at 3. We joke about how this team is a 500 team. Joe, since you won last week, I will give you the floor. How many Mets wins in the next 6?
Over. They're going over 3. They're going to go 4-2. The Mets just have a tendency to perform against the teams that are a little bit better and underperform against the teams that are not. Toronto, really like their roster. Philly, I like their roster despite how they're performing. So I'm going to say the Mets go ahead and they take 4 out of 6. So I'm over.
And as it stands right now, the Mets expect to see old friends both Taijuan Walker and Chris Bassett throughout this stretch. I'm going to go with the push. I'm going with 3. I think the Mets play 500 baseball this week. We've seen them get hot. We've seen them get cold. I think they go somewhere right in the middle with 3 out of 6 this week. Our next one, Mets quality starts. Reminder, 6 innings, 3 runs or less. Over-under push is set at just 2, Joe. Just 2. And I am going to go with the push here. I am going to take the 2 quality starts for the Mets out of these next 6 games. I don't have a lot of faith in the back end of this rotation right now to work deep into games. What about you?
I'm also going to push. I was very close to going over. And it's funny, we just had all this conversation at the top of the show, and I get to our segment here, and I'm like, you know, I'm starting to feel optimistic for some reason, but I will be,
I don't know why.
I don't know, but I will go with a push. I'll join you. I think just a couple makes sense.
All right, the next one, a fun one. Francisco Alvarez home runs in the next 6 games. The line is set at 2, Joe. You are up first for this one.
I'll push. I don't think, maybe Alvarez keeps up this pace of just homering, it feels like every day, but I'll go with 2 and push it.
All right, I'm going to go under here because he's got to cool off at some point. That doesn't mean I think Alvarez still hits the ball really, really well. And it wouldn't shock me to see him get to that line of 2, but I'll go under 2 for Alvarez. Once again, they're probably going to give him a little bit of a rest at some point here. It feels like he's been playing a lot, so that might factor into this. I'll go under. Our last one, over-under push. How many games does Mark Vientos start in the next 6? Joe, I'm going to push and go 3. They refuse to play Vientos consistently, and even him playing 3 of 6 is frustrating. And if Vientos doesn't hit, so be it. But how would you ever know? I mean, how would you ever know? We went through this exact thing with Francisco Alvarez. He comes up, and everyone's like, oh, he's not ready. He can't hit. And then he gets to consistently play, and all of a sudden he gets hot. You got to let these guys settle in. I don't believe the Mets are going to do it. I'll go with a push of 3 games for Vientos this week.
I'm going to go over. I know Buck did say that Vientos will play the next 3 games, and he's played 2 of them. So we're going to, in theory, have number 1 on Tuesday night against the Phillies. And, all he has to do is play 3 of the next 5. So I know that he's been kind of splitting time essentially with Vogelbach, but I will say he will go over and he'll play 4.
Okay, let's get to our rotation review. That wraps up the scoreboard. The rotation review for the week. This is our rapid fire look at the state of the starters. Let's start with the 2 big guns at the top here, Joe. Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, who have surprisingly run hot and cold this season. Now they've both dealt with different ailments. This week, it felt like the big Scherzer week, and Verlander, of course, had the letdown, which was a big disappointment at Coors. What did you see from these guys, Joe? It looks like Scherzer is somebody who, even when he doesn't have the fastball fully cooking, it's nice to be able to see him go to different pitches, and he's just a total pro. I have full confidence in Scherzer, and to be honest with you, I have the same confidence in Verlander. It just feels like he's still getting his feet under him after missing such a big chunk of the opening of the season.
That's exactly what I was going to say about Verlander. It feels like he's getting his feet under him because it feels like it's a great start, then a not good start, a great start, then a not good start. And
location,
it's kind of not
too. It's not stuff. So, it doesn't look to be right. No. It doesn't look to be a stuff.
No, when he wants to get up to 96, he has no problem doing that. So Verlander's stuff is fine. I think at Coors, he was not locating well. And if you don't locate at Coors Field, that's kind of the last place you want to not locate because you will get shelled. Even if the team's not that good, the ball just carries there. So, not a great start for Verlander. They certainly need more consistency out of him. I have some confidence that is coming. This guy won the Cy Young last year. Sure, he's older, but we have to remember, too, he missed a good chunk of time and only took 1 rehab start before coming back. Typically, that would be like a 2 to 3 rehab start deal, and came back in 1, been good, just wasn't so good in Colorado. I loved what I saw from Max Scherzer in Colorado. The velocity is down a couple ticks, and look, we said this on the show a couple weeks back. It's okay if Max Scherzer isn't throwing 96 miles an hour anymore, but he can't approach hitters at 92 and 93 the same way he was at 96. So he needs to locate, and he located fantastic in his start against Colorado, and the breaking stuff was on point. So to me, I felt really good coming out of the Max Scherzer start. Didn't feel good, obviously, coming out of the Verlander start, but I still feel confident in him.
All right, let's look at Kodai Senga, who has kind of had a roller coaster of a season. 1 so-so start, 1 great start, 1 bad start. Obviously, against the Cubs, it was kind of somewhere in the middle. He didn't have control. He walked 5 batters. He did get through 5 innings and 3 earned runs, which at this point with the Mets rotation, you almost sign up for that. But once again, the 5 walks, very concerning. Did strike out 6. I think the good right now for Senga, Joe, he's kept the ball in the ballpark. When you look at his last 5 starts, he's only given up 1 home run in his last 5 starts. The strikeouts have been very, very promising. The control is the big thing. He's walking guys, and that's why Senga has really bounced back and forth trying to get to that 6th inning. He did get to 6 innings twice in May. The other 2 starts, he pitched 5. It's good to see him not having those shortened starts. But Senga, it feels like he's just 1 step away from really unlocking being a great pitcher, not a solid pitcher, and it's the walks right now.
He battled in that start in Chicago, and that to me was a great sign because the way he was missing the strike zone could have been a disastrous outing, and he was able to rein it in enough to hold the Cubs to only 3 runs and get through 5 innings despite throwing just over 100 pitches. What's really big for him, like you said with the home run ball, Connor, is his command within the strike zone is good. So when he's throwing strikes, it's fastballs up, it's fork balls down, it's breaking balls on the corners. Like when you see some pitchers with some off command, when Scherzer was going bad for a minute there, they're missing in the middle of the plate. Senga's misses are not in the middle. So when he's throwing strikes, he's keeping it away from the barrel of the bat. However, the control is something that was a bit of an issue in Japan. It's not like he was a control artist there. But he needs to find a way to throw more strikes so he can be more consistent. Because otherwise you're looking at a guy, which, I mean, for $15 million a year, like that's sometimes what you get. But it could be a guy that's just going to be up and down. At the same time, he's been in America for 2 months, basically. So I don't think he I'm not disappointed with Senga. I just think it's one of those things that you have to deal with the ups and downs that come with his adjustment, and he needs to find a way to throw more strikes.
This is a little thing, but I really like his attitude. Like you look at these guys coming over, it's a big adjustment. There's going to be good days and bad days. And with Senga, I think he's got a little bit more dog in him than you'd expect with that adjustment, where you go, okay, he's not having his best stuff. It's really, there's a lot of pressure on him out there. And like you said, Joe, he battles through. That's why I'm optimistic about Senga, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, oh, Senga's been the best story on the Mets or he's been amazing or anything like that. I think he's on a trajectory where it's like, okay, he's figuring out how to pitch here right now, and things have been okay. If he can unlock that extra step, he's going to be in a really, really, really good place. So now we get to the part of the rotation that's been very hard to figure out. We'll start with the good and the bad. We'll start with the good. Carlos Carrasco had his best start of the year this week in Chicago. He went almost 7 innings, 6 2/3 innings, 1 earned run, only walked 2 batters. And walks really haven't been a huge problem for Cookie over his last couple of starts. He's not striking out a lot of guys, but 1 earned run, almost over 7 innings, Joe, against a Cubs team that, listen, the Mets really, really needed that win. You go into that game and you're like, man, this looks like a sweep with Carrasco on the mound. Anything they can get from Carrasco near this state, Joe, would completely alter the back end of the rotation. I'm not confident in that, but even if you can get one of these once in a while, it's a huge, huge help.
I was encouraged by what I saw from Carrasco. Obviously, you could just read the stat line, and that's a good thing. But I was just talking about Senga's command within the strike zone. That was Carrasco's biggest problem throughout the year, lead up until the last start, is he would just throw meatballs down the middle, basically, and he'd get, the ball would get slammed. But his velocity was even up a little bit. I saw some 94s in there, whereas before he went on the IL, you were seeing 89 to 91, maybe 92. Saw some 94s sprinkled in there, mostly 92, 93. So the velocity was good. He was inducing weak contact. He's not missing a bunch of bats at this stage in his career, and that's okay for kind of what you're hoping from him. But man, pitching into the 7th inning might as well feel like 2 complete games in a row with the way this rotation has been.
True.
So very encouraged with what Carrasco showed. So we'll see if he could repeat that here his next time out, because that's going to be the key. Is they need one of these 2 back-end guys to consistently perform like a back-end starter or a little bit better. And this was a good step in that direction, I think, for Carrasco.
Our last one, this is the rough one. Tylor Megill has hit a patch that it's getting rough out there, right? You look at Megill's last 2 starts. He's the guy that made 2 starts since we last recorded a pod. He pitched in Chicago. He lasted 3 2/3 innings. He gave up 4 earned runs, 6 total runs, 2 home runs. He took the loss, obviously. And then the one that is just wildly frustrating, Joe, obviously, is the start against the Rockies in a game the Mets lose 11-10, where the Mets get a big lead out of the gate. It's Coors Field. Teams can always come back. Megill goes 4 innings, 4 earned runs again, 6 total runs again. Didn't give up any home runs, but a ton of contact. Not striking anyone out, not really missing bats. He gave up 10 hits in 4 innings. I think, Joe, I look at this from 2 ways, right? Megill is quickly pitching his way into being the guy out when Quintana's ready to go. Because say what you want about Carrasco, and he drives all of us nuts. Carrasco quietly guts out games. Like, even when he doesn't have it, Carrasco will try to get you 5, try to get you 6. I mean, Megill's best days sometimes are 5 innings. He can't go deep into games. Coors Field's a nightmare because he's pitching to contact a lot lately. I don't know where I'm at with Megill right now, Joe. Where I'm at is when Quintana's back, Megill's out of the rotation. But I know they've tried it. He seems like a reliever profile to me. And if this is a team that has massive problems pitching deep into games, and maybe that changes when Megill's out of the rotation, then you need a guy in the Nogosic role that's not Nogosic, and that feels like Megill. Am I crazy?
No, I think it would not be a bad thing. I know they're hurting for starting pitching depth, and David Peterson had a great start his first start back in Syracuse, and he had a decent start his second time, gave up 4 runs, but did strike out 10. So like he's down there missing bats at a big level. But with the way this bullpen is, and Tylor Megill's kind of inability, even on his good days, to make it 3 times through a lineup, it's like basically once they see him a third time, it's over. Unfortunately, the swing and miss stuff isn't there, and he really will need that swing and miss stuff if he's transitioning to the bullpen. But Connor, I do think for the overall setup of the roster, when Jose Quintana comes back, which he's cleared to ramp up, but there hasn't been any updates on like a start of a rehab assignment or anything. And surely that rehab assignment will be multiple starts long. So I think we got a little bit until we see him. But once he's back, Megill to the bullpen, I think is something that makes sense. Very similar to last year. Like I still think the Mets will need to trade for a reliever regardless. But remember, the end of June last year, you and I were on the show saying, give Mark Vientos a look at right-handed DH so you could avoid trading something for a right-handed DH at the deadline. They didn't do it. They traded for Darren Ruff. We know what happened.
Disaster.
So could you save yourself some trade chips? Not that you won't get another reliever, but now you maybe don't have to go get 2 relievers.
It's a great callback. It really is. Find out now. Find out now.
Yeah.
And something the Mets need to find out now is experimenting with this lineup in a logical sense. We're going to line up the lineup every day when the Mets tweet out the lineup. Twitter is chaos. It's chaos. Mets fan. And you know what? I used to be one of those people that like during the Terry Collins era, I was like, dang, people really overreact to the lineups. This year, I am a lineup reactor. I refresh Twitter. I wait for it. And it's not just for fantasy baseball. I am fascinated by this, whoever is constructing this lineup, whether it's Buck, whether it's the analytics department, the front office, whether it's everybody. I'm not going to pretend to know. I would hope that it's a cohesive effort because Buck's got enough day-to-day duties that you would hope the analytics department, and I know some people just cringe at that word, but guess what? Favorable matchups due to data really does help in baseball. I really hope that they're aiding with it, but it doesn't seem like it with a lot of the lineups I look at. There's millions of times I look at the lineup and I'm like, I do not work for the Mets analytics department, but I have enough of a brain to know that doesn't make sense. So Joe, let's do it like this, right? Let's just line up a lineup that you think is an everyday approach, right? None of this, we need this guy against a lefty and we need this guy against a righty. What do you think is the generic Mets lineup going forward that you feel like they should roll out?
Well, Connor, we know exactly how you feel about the lineup. We have a group text, so we definitely.
It's usually me yelling into the void, by the way.
Yes, a little bit, but I will say I am like the antithesis of you in the sense that I used to freak out about the lineup and I now don't. Like I feel like now
you're numb to it.
I'm a little numb to it. And also it's just like, I don't think we understand everything that goes into the daily making of a lineup, who comes in not feeling well or whatever decision. But
I know Mark Canha can't hit. I know that much.
In the world that I am in control and I don't have to worry about ailments or anything, just what's my regular lineup? It's going to be Nimmo batting leadoff.
Good call.
Lindor,
good start.
Lindor batting second, despite his struggles. I think that's a good spot for him. I like McNeil in the 3-hole. Alonso cleaning up. Beatty 5th. Alvarez 6th.
Now we're talking.
Starling Marte 7. You're DHing Mark Vientos every darn day and batting him 8th. And then batting 9th is Mark Canha. He is the left fielder for everything he's doing. We said this on the show over the last couple of weeks. He's going to be in the lineup unless you're playing Tommy Pham. That's the reality of it. They don't have outfielders to call up. They're not ready to call up Ronny Mauricio and shift McNeil. So for now, Mark Canha is the left fielder. And all I need him to do in the 9-hole is go back to being an on-base guy. I don't need him to be a run producer. I don't need him to hit for average. Get on base, reset the lineup, bring that top back up. And I think that offense is more than fine. More than fine.
I like it. I do like it a lot. And I agree with you pretty much on all fronts. I guess there's some experiment. The big thing I really like is McNeil 3 and Pete 4, because even if Nimmo or Lindor don't get on, McNeil finds a way to extend innings and get on. If McNeil gets on base for Pete, that's a massive game changer. And the balance of power with, because some people probably listen to Joe and they'll say, why wouldn't you have Alvarez 5 and Beatty 6? I like the balance of guys that can get on base with power and the lengthening of power. I don't think Alvarez should bat 9th, but I don't know if he should go up to, and he's not going to go up to 2 consistently. So here's the situation with Canha, and I agree with you. It seems like big situations just find him. It's insane. And you're right, Joe. If you bat him 9th, you wonder, can he go back into being a guy that really is a second leadoff man, taking counts, trying to work more walks, not trying to take these giant cuts. I mean, it's fascinating how they've used him this year. He's batted second twice in 2 games. Well, I'll do starts. So 1 start batting second, 10 starts batting 5th, 13 starts batting 6th, 11 starts batting 7th, 7 batting 8th, and then no starts batting 9th.
Time for that to change. We were talking about Alvarez can't bat 9th anymore.
It's Canha.
Canha should bat 9th now.
I'm with you all the way. And the fact he hasn't started a game batting 9th it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And when you bat him 6th or 7th, which is the majority of his starts, and 5th, he finds himself in situations with guys like McNeil, Alonso, and Marte on a lot. He really does. And they're big situations. Or Beatty. Or Vogelbach, which is even worse, because Vogelbach is the guy you want taking the big cuts, and Vogelbach's more of what we want Mark Canha to be. Like, what is it? Yeah. It's all right. Go ahead. It's infuriating.
You're talking Canha it feels like every other time he comes up, it's second and third, it's bases loaded, there's runners in scoring position. And at that point, you actually do want a hitter that's going to try to drive in the run. Vogelbach comes up in those spots and tries to draw a walk and loads the bases for Canha to try to actually produce the run. So maybe Canha's putting a little additional pressure on himself when he's coming up in these spots that he feels like, I can't draw a walk because the guy behind me might not make drive the run in. So I'm going to try to do it myself, and it hasn't worked out for him. So I think optimally, you're throwing him at the bottom of the lineup and seeing if he could regain basically what he's been for his whole career. Like, I know he's been very bad this year, but Mark Canha is a guy who's been relatively consistent throughout his career as to what type of player he was. So it's almost surprising that he's been this poor.
It is. On base is where it matters, right? 2019, 396 on base. 2020, 387. 2021, 358. Last year with the Mets, 367. That's really good. Really good. Mark Canha was 30 points away from having an 800 OPS, which I don't need that from Mark Canha. I just need him to get on base. And I think that lineup you projected maximizes that. And we're not done with the lineup discussion, because there's a question in the mailbag that will kind of give me a chance. Maybe I can rip my version off. But a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. We're going to take a quick 15-second break and be right back with your mailbag questions.
This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Cadillac showroom today.
Welcome back. It's time for the mailbag, and this is an easy transition from the segment we left off with, Joe. This first one is from Dennis. Dennis asked us, how long until Canha becomes the 4th or 5th outfielder with McNeil in left and Mauricio at second? So this is one of those ones that probably is a lot more fun in MLB The Show, because Jeff McNeil is a really good second baseman, and I'll lean on you for this, Joe. I don't think Mauricio is a very good second baseman right now. Maybe he can become one. So I don't love that defensive drop-off. But offensively, it is a lot of fun when you swap out Canha's spot in the lineup for McNeil and add in the power element that Mauricio has. When we talk about a guy driving in runs, Mauricio is a guy that is going to swing the bat a lot.
Hey, we talk about how maddening it is at times that they're not playing the young players. So they'll call up Mauricio and they'll play Escobar at second and then McNeil in left. And that'll be that. But look, I think we should pump the brakes a little bit on the Mauricio thing. He's playing great ball in Syracuse. I want to keep letting him doing that there. Like, I don't think the defense is there yet. He has 6 errors, I believe, so far at second base in a very short time playing there. So he has room to grow defensively. So let him do that there. I understand the excitement and we want all the kids in the lineup. And I do think you will see Mauricio at some point, but I don't think it should be imminent. I would give Canha another look, but certainly if Mauricio improves defensively and keeps hitting the way he is, eventually he's going to force their hand, have to call him up. And at that point, then Mark Canha could shift to that backup outfielder role, as Dennis asked. But I don't think that's something that we should look to be happening very soon.
All right, so the next question is from Christopher Oreo, who asked, after Pham's great game, is Vogie the odd man out? And how is Mauricio's defense coming along? I've heard mixed reviews. I think Vogelbach's days, I don't want to say are numbered, because it feels like the Mets are really holding on that Vogelbach gets going. So I wouldn't completely assume he's going to be the odd man out. But to Christopher's original point, Joe, I don't think this team has any interest in moving on from Tommy Pham.
And they shouldn't. Like,
they
Tommy Pham
need outfielders.
Yeah. He hasn't been great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to be the head of the Tommy Pham fan club or anything, but there's no outfielders in the organization. There's nobody to call up the play outfield. That would just be like, we don't like Tommy Pham, get rid of him. And then you're kind of stuck being short on outfielders. Vogelbach's lack of positional versility, aka playing defense, his power not showing
standing
up
in the field
at all. Yeah, he doesn't stand. He won't stand in the field. He'll stand on the dugout steps and clap. He does really, really great.
Do you think he takes ground balls ever? Like in spring, does Vogie?
He did in spring.
He did. Okay, I was genuinely curious.
Yeah, in spring training, he did take ground balls at first. My guess is it's probably few and far between at this point. But look, his problem is the lack of power. Right? He's not swinging the bat. That's even a little more maddening to me. Like, if he was hitting doubles and the ball just wasn't carrying over the fence, be a little less mad. But how many times does it feel like he's just watching every pitch go by? It doesn't look like he's interested in swinging at it. However, he's one of the only left-handed bats on the bench. So how easy is it to cut bait? I would think they would cut him before Tommy Pham. But who knows? I mean, maybe they keep them both. Like, we're talking about this bullpen, right? Like Steven Nagosic, you want someone other than Steven Nagosic to have that role, or Dominic Leone or Tommy Hunter. Like, maybe you just get rid of one of those guys and carry a little deeper bench for a period of time. But I would say I would personally cut bait with Vogelbach before I did Pham, just from the overall team fit and versatility. Like, it just doesn't seem like it's working.
Yeah, I saw a really good tweet from our buddy DJ Short, who obviously does a lot of great fantasy baseball work at NBC for Roto World. And it was basically, summed up in a sense, just saying that when Vogelbach actually swings, he is hitting the ball extremely, extremely hard. The problem is, I think besides Soto, he has the lowest swing rate in the National League, or maybe even baseball. So it's just crazy when you look at his problem is he just doesn't swing. He still can hit the ball hard. That's not the issue. And I think, Joe, that's why the Mets have held on so long.
Yeah, he hits the ball hard, but it's ground balls too. So he's not even elevating the ball. So he's hitting the ball very hard on the ground, and he can't run. So like, these guys, even if they make a diving stop, they could get up, take their time, and throw, and they get Vogie by 3 steps. So it's not even like it's much of a rush, but he needs to find a way to elevate the ball with that velocity, and then you'll see some home runs. But you wonder if he's running out of time. I mean, very often baseball teams look at Memorial Day weekend as kind of a barometer of when you consider changes within the roster. So that could be coming for Vogelbach if he doesn't turn around here really quick.
All right, our last mailbag question here is from Dean. Dean asked, is it safe to say going the optionable reliever route was a mistake this year? It feels like they mostly have mop-up guys with no upside at the front of the bullpen, and then Hunter, Leone, Nagosic. Even if Diaz was fully healthy, I think this pen would still be a big problem. I liked Montes de Oca before he got hurt.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit on earlier in the show, but like, even guys like Sam Coonrod, who I think we had some faith could be something. Steven Ridings, who they claimed from the Yankees, we thought could be something. both those guys have been hurt and haven't pitched. Montes de Oca, of course, injured. Eliezer Hernandez, the other pitcher they got from the Marlins, along with Jeff Brigham, just started a rehab assignment with St. Lucie. So if you're thinking about a non-Megill option for the Nogosic role, keep an eye on Eliezer Hernandez. That's something that he has done in his career, and he's kind of like a starter swingman in the Trevor Williams mold. Maybe he's not quite as good, but he's in that mold of a pitcher. So that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, I mean, there's no way around it, right? The bullpen hasn't performed, and the only way that you could say it is they didn't do enough because it hasn't performed. Sure, they had some injury bad luck, but guess what? Every team has injuries, especially with arms, and they just ended up not being as prepared as they should have for these injuries, because now you're relying on these arms that we're talking about that, now we kind of want off the team. So with nowhere to turn, that's the problem. You look at Syracuse, as great as they're performing offensively, they're giving up, it feels like 10 runs every game. Like the bullpen's getting beat up there, the rotation's getting beat up there. So like there's nowhere to turn. Unfortunately, they're kind of stuck.
There's no way around it, right? I think there's a couple ways to look at it, because you go into hindsight with the Mets right now. I mean, two guys, Joe, and this is like really nitpicking, but you want to talk about not having length in the bullpen. Two guys the Mets have traded away over the last year plus are having really good seasons are Miguel Castro and Colin Holderman. Those guys are playing big. Castro is splitting save duties with Andrew Chafin for the Diamondbacks. And I know he didn't have a good season for the Yankees after the Mets did trade him. He was relatively what he's been his whole career. But in 26 games for the Diamondbacks this year, I mean, he's got a 2.22 ERA. He has a handful of saves, splitting saves role for Arizona. And you look at Holderman, who was the Vogelbach trade, he's got a 2.33 ERA in 20 games. So those are moves with, and I'm not one of those guys that just piles on Billy Epler all the time. But you talk about the Mets not having any arms or wanting all these optionable arms. They've also let a couple out the door for not too much over the years that are in significant high leverage roles for teams that are playing decent baseball right now that didn't really have a lot of expectations. So I think those things get lost in the shuffle as well, that when you have arms in the system that are okay and you let some of them out the door quick, reality can hit fast that you start throwing the Nogosics every day.
So the Holderman one is definitely one we could look back on, but it is a prime example of when everyone says, go trade for this, go trade for that. When you make a trade early, which they made that trade early for Vogelbach, that wasn't a deadline day deal. It costs you more. So they felt the need that they needed to add more thump, and Daniel Vogelbach had historically hit for power. So it's like when the Mets traded for him, it was a clear cut. This is a guy that mashes righties and hits home runs against righties. And he hasn't done that really much as a Met, obviously. But that's the price you pay when you try to trade early. It costs more. And, Colin Holderman, I think he's amongst the leader in holds, which is just absolutely perfect for his name. So, I think you could have definitely used him. Miguel Castro, I can't get on them about. They badly needed a lefty reliever. They traded him for Joely Rodriguez. They both were kind of equally not that good last year. So that kind of felt like swapping spit in a sense. And now this year, Miguel Castro looks great, but he would have been a free agent anyway. So let's be honest. If Miguel Castro was with the Mets last year and pitched like he did for the Yankees, the Mets would have let him walk as a free agent anyway. So I can't get on that one, but the Holderman Vogelbach trade, I think at the time I was fine with it because I thought Holderman was really just a middle reliever and Vogelbach would give that kind of thump that the lineup needed. Unfortunately, he has not, and now Holderman's pitching even better than that.
All right. It just goes to show you sometimes, and I was on board with getting Vogelbach, and I don't even think I thought he was fine last year when they got him. It hasn't worked out for the large part this year. So you just never know how those things are going to go. And the bottom line is the Mets need more arms that can give relief help. And we'll see as they get closer to the deadline how they address that this year. All right. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move-Up Sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.